Morning light filtered gently through the leaves, casting a golden glow over the small garden behind the modest hut. Tu Diep stepped outside, holding her familiar watering can in hand. She moved carefully between the garden beds, each motion slow and attentive, as if she were nurturing something far more precious than just vegetables. The garden wasn't large, but rows of mustard greens, spinach, and morning glory stood in perfect lines, each one planted with care. Watching them grow a little more each day was enough to remind her that her presence in this world still held meaning. After watering, she returned to the house, quietly rinsing the dishes and tidying the small kitchen. The bowls and plates were old and mismatched, but she washed each one with gentle hands, dried them, and placed them neatly on the shelf. Outside, the chickens wandered calmly around the yard, pecking at fallen grains without a sound, almost as if they, too, understood the peace that now surrounded this place. With everything in order, Tu Diep grabbed her basket and headed uphill. She wanted to check on the cucumber trellis she had tended for the past few weeks. Climbing the small rise, she finally reached the patch, and the sight brought a soft smile to her lips. The cucumber vines had covered the frame in a lush green canopy. Large leaves swayed gently in the breeze, bright yellow blossoms peeked through, and between them, long ripe cucumbers hung like little emerald treasures. She knelt down, turning each leaf gently, checking for pests. With practiced hands, she plucked away wilted leaves and carefully picked the mature cucumbers, one by one. As she worked, her thoughts drifted to the past. Those dark days when she had been cast out, the scars that had yet to fade. But looking at the vibrant plants now, she felt something within her blooming too. Something like hope. She paused for a moment, chose the largest cucumber, rinsed it with fresh water, and took a bite. The cool, crisp sweetness burst across her tongue. It tasted of hard work, of every drop of sweat she had shed, of every time she had lifted herself from rock bottom. When she finished, she sat quietly by the bamboo fence, gazing out over the valley. Her eyes glowed with a rare softness. Moments like this might be fleeting, but to Tu Diep, they were everything. Proof that she could build a life with her own hands, a life rooted in peace and quiet strength. After a short rest, she stood up, lifted her basket, and continued working, grateful that today she was here to see another day begin. That morning, the grapefruit orchard was unusually lively. Groups of workers bustled around, harvesting, sorting, and loading fresh fruit into tall stacks of sacks. Nearby, trucks waited to transport the bounty to distributors across the region. James appeared, calm and composed as always. He walked the narrow path between the trees, stopping occasionally to inspect the fruit and speak with the staff. When he bent down to lift a grapefruit, his eyes sparkled with satisfaction. The orchard had thrived this season, plentiful fruit and exceptional quality. It was the reward of months of careful work, dedication, and attention. Passing by a group of men lifting sacks of grapefruit onto a truck, James nodded in greeting. "Tired?" he asked, his tone light but warm. "You've all done a great job today." The workers smiled back, some laughing. James reached into his pocket and pulled out several small gift boxes he had prepared in advance. "Just a little something," he said, handing them out. "A small thank you, and an early Christmas gift." Later, at the section where the women were harvesting, James didn't hesitate to join in. He crouched down, gently snipping fruit from the branches and placing them into baskets. Holding a large golden grapefruit, he turned to one of the women with a grin. "Looks bigger than last year, doesn't it?" "It really does," she replied, smiling. Jajima nodded. "That's because of everyone's effort." Once the orchard visit was finished, James made his way to a small store in town. There, he picked out a small Christmas tree, simple but charming. He also bought a few adorable gift boxes in different shapes and colors. His eyes were bright, almost boyish with excitement, as if he were preparing a surprise for someone dear. That afternoon, James arrived at Tu Diep's hut. She was in the garden, watering her lush green vegetable beds. When she saw him, she smiled. He didn't say a word. He simply picked up the second watering can and silently helped her tend to each row. The cool water flowed over the roots, soaking the earth, and quietly, something else was being nurtured between them. After they finished, James rinsed his hands and brought out the Christmas tree and gifts. Sitting under the front porch, he carefully arranged the boxes, tying them with red ribbons and strands of tinsel. As he adjusted the little star at the top of the tree, Hacky came bounding out of nowhere, wagging its tail and leaping into his lap. James laughed and patted Hacky's head. "Missed me, huh?" In that moment, surrounded by laughter, by light, by quiet gestures of care, he realized something. Not only had Tu Diep made space for him in her life, but even Hacky had accepted him as part of this humble little home. And for James, that was more than enough. This place, little by little, was becoming something he never expected. A real home. Night began to fall, and darkness slowly wrapped around the small hut nestled at the foot of the hill. In the quiet of the evening, James sat beside a tiny Christmas tree, carefully wrapping gifts he had bought earlier that day. His hands moved gently, folding paper, tying ribbons, his eyes shimmering with the quiet joy of someone preparing something magical for someone special. The finished presents were neatly stacked beneath the tree. James stood up, took a few steps back, and admired his creation, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. A little later, soft footsteps echoed outside. Tu Diep had returned. As she reached the yard, she stopped in her tracks, caught off guard by the soft glow of twinkling lights shining from inside the house. Her eyes widened with surprise. The scene before her was completely unfamiliar, festive, warm, and full of wonder. In the middle of the simple wooden hut, the spirit of Christmas had come to life. She clutched the bundle of firewood in her hands, hesitated for a moment, then slowly pushed the door open. Right then, James stepped out, wearing a bright red Santa Claus outfit, holding a small cake in his hands. "Merry Christmas," he beamed. Juliet stood frozen for a moment, then broke into a laugh, covering her mouth in delight. Her eyes shimmered with emotion. "You did all this for me?" James nodded and placed the cake on the table. "Since you were a kid, have you ever celebrated a real Christmas?" She shook her head softly. "Then let me give you your first." They sat down together by the tree. James cut a slice of cake and handed it to her. She accepted it shyly, took a small bite, and her eyes lit up. "It's delicious. Can I have another piece?" James chuckled and handed her more. When he noticed a bit of cream at the corner of her mouth, he gently wiped it with a napkin. The simple gesture made her pause, lifting her gaze, and their eyes met, quietly locked in a moment full of warmth. Just as the house filled with laughter and the soft glow of the tree, James suddenly stood. "Come on, there's one more thing I want to do." Curious, she followed. They made their way to a small building where a group of underprivileged children had gathered. James and Tu Diep brought along the wrapped gifts, handing them out one by one. The children's laughter rang out in the cold night air, their eyes glowing with joy. Tu Diep stood among them, her hands holding onto the little fingers of giggling children. Beside her was James, the man who, without needing to say much, had given her a miracle. And that night, she understood. Her very first Christmas was finally complete. The next morning, as the sun gently peeked over the hills, James sat alone in his office, quietly scrolling through the photos he had taken the day before with Tu Diep. Each picture captured a tender, meaningful moment. Her gentle smile, the clear light in her eyes when she received a gift, and the warmth they shared as they handed out presents to the children. His eyes softened as he looked through them, the corner of his lips slightly curved. A calm settled in his heart, warmed by those sweet, simple memories. At the same time, over at the company's lumber workshop, Lynn, the diligent and capable assistant, was busy reviewing ledgers, organizing documents, and marking urgent orders for the morning briefing with James. When she entered the office, she sat across from him, opened her files, and began her report in a clear, precise tone. After listening, James placed his cup of tea down and said slowly, "I'd like to entrust you with something bigger, overseeing the entire operations of the Western facility." Lynn was slightly surprised, but quickly composed herself and nodded. "Thank you for your trust. I'll do my best." James gave a quiet nod, though his eyes seemed to drift somewhere else, as if his thoughts were reaching far beyond the walls of his office. Meanwhile, on a quiet hillside deep in the forest, Tu Diep was working alone, harvesting arrowroot. Sunlight filtered through the trees and fell on her face, her brow dotted with sweat, but her eyes remained focused, determined. Her small hands tirelessly dug into the earth, lifting one heavy root after another. Each stroke of the hoe was demanding, but she didn't complain. She simply pressed her lips together and continued, pouring her strength into every movement. She knew the road she had chosen was not easy. There was no support from family, no protective safety net. Only her two hands and her unwavering will. And perhaps because of that, every root she pulled from the ground, every patch of soil she tilled, carried with it her quiet pride, proof that she was learning to take charge of her life on her own terms. Elsewhere, James remained seated in silence, eyes fixed on the window. In his mind, Tu Diep's image played over and over, the small frame wrapped in worn clothes, her sun-kissed face yet always shining with quiet hope. He understood now that behind her calm exterior was an extraordinary journey of resilience. And that truth, her quiet, unyielding strength, only made him respect her more. She had fallen, yes, but she had also risen. And that, to him, was the most beautiful part of all. In the soft afternoon light, James brought Tu Diep to a small bookstore tucked into the corner of a quiet street. The air inside carried the gentle scent of fresh paper. Rows of books lined the neatly organized shelves, offering a variety of titles and genres. Tu Diep stood in awe. She had never stepped into a place like this before. Everything felt new, strange, and yet deeply inviting. James walked silently beside her, then paused in front of the self-development section. He pulled out a book with a simple white cover and held it out to her. "I want to give you this," he said gently. "It doesn't teach you how to live perfectly. It just reminds you that everyone has the right to move forward, no matter what their past was." Tu Diep accepted the book with both hands, her eyes glistening with emotion. After paying, James led her to a small cafe nearby. They chose a quiet corner. James opened the book, flipped to the first few pages, and began reading aloud. His voice was steady, deep, and warm. Tu Diep sat silently, listening, not daring to move, afraid that even the smallest shift would shatter the stillness of the moment. By the time they returned to the hut, dusk had fallen. They sat together in front of the fire. The crackling of wood filled the space, adding to the comforting hush of the evening. James picked up the book again and continued reading aloud. Tu Diep curled up with her knees drawn close, arms wrapped around them, her head resting lightly against the bamboo wall. She listened to every word, letting the sound of his voice settle into her heart. After a while, James paused and glanced to the side. She had fallen asleep without him noticing, her head gently leaning against his leg. Her face, while asleep, was serene, almost childlike in its stillness. He slowly set the book down, leaned over to adjust the scarf around her shoulders, then froze. His eyes lingered on her face, just inches away. Her closed eyes, the soft curve of her lips, the way her breathing rose and fell with quiet rhythm. Something stirred in his chest. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair away from her forehead. Then, slowly, he leaned in, intending to place a light kiss on her brow. But just as his lips neared her skin, Tu Diep opened her eyes. Startled, she looked up at him in silence. Their eyes locked for a few seconds that felt impossibly long. James froze. Before he could say anything, she turned her head away, cheeks flushed deep red. He sat back and let out a soft, awkward laugh. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you." Tu Diep didn't answer. Her lips pressed into a thin line, but her eyes carried something new, something uncertain, something quiet and trembling. Not a rejection, not an acceptance. Just a soft shift, like a door, once closed, now quietly left ajar. Between them, the distance had changed. Closer, warmer, and a little more fragile.
Diệp nhận ra mình yêu Seo Yang, nhưng liệu họ có còn cơ hội yêu nhau không? Dưới bầu trời xám xịt của một buổi sáng mùa đông, vùng nông thôn Việt Nam chìm trong cái lạnh buốt thấu xương. Những cơn gió heo mây thổi qua cánh đồng mang theo hơi thở của đất trời, và tất cả những nỗi niềm chưa thể nói thành lời của Tử Diệp. Sau ngày cô từ chối tình cảm của Jam, người đàn ông đã kéo cô ra khỏi bóng tối quá khứ. Trái tim cô rơi vào những khoảng trống không tên, Như khi ánh sáng ban mai đều nhẹ rọi xuống, một sự thật dần hé lộ trong cô. Cô yêu anh dù nỗi tự ti vẫn như một sợi dây vô hình trói chặt cô lại. Liệu tình yêu ấy có đủ sức vượt qua những rào cản của số phận, hay chỉ là một giấc mơ ngắn ngủi tan biến giữa thực tại khắc nghiệt? Hành trình trong tập